Right now, without moving an inch, you are surrounded by fire. It waits behind a switch, it sleeps inside the knob of your stove, it hides in the tiny metal wheel of a lighter, forgotten in some drawer. You can summon it in less than a second, warm your hands, boil your water, and forget it ever mattered. But for almost the entire story of your species, fire was not something you made when you wanted it. It was something you could not afford to lose. Not for a single night, not for a single hour. And the real answer to how your ancestors survived is far stranger than two sticks rubbed together. Because for a vast stretch of human history, your ancestors may not have known how to make fire at all. They only knew how to keep it. Think about what that really means. Somewhere out there, hundreds of thousands of years ago, a small band of people stood around a single glowing pile of coals. And that pile was the most valuable thing they owned. More valuable than any spear. More valuable than any hide. Because if it died, they could not simply light another one. They would have to wait. Wait for the sky itself to strike the ground. To understand why, you have to forget everything you assume about fire. You did not invent fire. The planet did. Long before there were humans, there was lightning, and lightning found dry grass and the grass burned. Volcanoes bled fire onto the land. Wildfires swept across ancient plains for millions of years with no one to watch them. Fire was already ancient when your ancestors were still small, hairy, and terrified of it. And they were terrified. Every animal is. Fire is one of the few forces in nature that every creature instinctively flees. So the first and most important thing your ancestors ever did with fire was the hardest thing imaginable. They walked toward it. Picture that moment. A grass fire has passed. The plain is black and smoking. Every sensible animal has run the other way. And one small upright creature does not run. It steps closer. It feels the warmth. It sees the light. And instead of terror, something new flickers behind its eyes. Curiosity. That single act, repeated across countless generations, may be the quiet beginning of everything you are. But here is the problem no one tells you about. Finding fire is not the same as owning it. A wildfire gives you flames for an afternoon. Then the grass runs out, the rain comes, and the fire goes with it. If all you can do is borrow fire from the sky, you are still at the mercy of the sky. So the question that shaped human history was never really how you start a fire. The question was how you keep one alive when the world is trying to put it out. And nothing tries harder than rain. To feel the weight of this, imagine the world your ancestors actually lived in, not a dry campfire under clear stars. Imagine a week of gray sky, a forest where every branch is soaked and every leaf drips, cold seeping up through wet ground into your bones, children shivering, and the one thing that could save them slowly drowning in front of your eyes. A dying fire in the rain is not quiet. It hisses. It smokes. It shrinks. The bright orange fades to a dull, sullen red. And your ancestors learned to read that fading light the way you read a face for signs of sickness. Because in a real sense, the fire was alive. It breathed. It ate. It could be starved, or drowned, or smothered, and it could die. So how do you keep something alive that water is designed to kill? The first answer is beautiful in its simplicity. You do not try to keep the flame. You keep the coal. A flame is fragile and dramatic and hungry, but underneath it, buried in the heart of a fire, lives something far more patient, a glowing ember. It does not leap. It does not roar. It simply holds heat, deep and slow, for hours. And your ancestors discovered that if you protect that ember, you can carry the soul of a fire through the worst weather the world can throw at you. There is real evidence buried in the ground for how long humans have lived with fire. In a place in northern Israel called Gesher Benot Ya'aqov, the archaeologist Nama Goren Inbar and her team uncovered burned seeds, burned wood, and clusters of fire-cracked flint, arranged not like random wildfire, but like hearths. Places where fire was gathered and used again and again. And the astonishing part is the age. Those traces are around 790,000 years old, nearly 800,000 years. Long before your species existed in its modern form, someone was sitting by a fire that they controlled. But controlling a fire on a good day is one thing. Depending on it every single day is another. For a long time, scientists assumed that once humans mastered fire, they simply had it. the way you have it now. Always available. But when the archaeologists Will Robrooks and Paula Villa examined the evidence across Europe, they found something surprising. Widespread, everyday use of fire only shows up clearly a few 100,000 years ago. For a long stretch before that, humans lived in cold places and left very little sign of regular fire at all. Think about what that means. Fire was not a switch they flipped. It was a fragile guest that came and went, something they were still learning to hold on to. And then there is the most provocative idea of all. Two archaeologists, Dennis Sandgathe and Harold Dibble, spent years studying the fire traces left by Neanderthals, your close and now vanished cousins. They noticed something strange. The Neanderthals seemed to use fire heavily during warm periods, and far less during the coldest, harshest times, exactly when you would expect them to need it most. That is backwards, unless something else was going on. Their controversial suggestion was this. Perhaps the Neanderthals could not reliably make fire from nothing. Perhaps much of the time they collected it, from lightning strikes and wildfires, which are far more common in warm, dry seasons than cold, wet ones. When nature offered fire, they took it and kept it. When nature stopped, the fires went out, and they endured the cold and waited. Not everyone agrees. It is still argued over fiercely, but sit with it for a moment because it reframes everything. If it is even partly true, then for enormous stretches of the human story, fire was not manufactured. It was harvested from the sky and guarded like a living treasure. And if you cannot make it, then keeping it alive is not a chore. It is survival itself. So imagine you are one of these people. You have no lighter. You may have no reliable way to spark a flame from cold stone. What you have is this fire right now and the knowledge that it must not die before the next storm passes. What do? First, you learn the secret language of embers. You learn that a fire left alone burns bright and then burns out, wasting itself. So instead of letting it blaze, you learn to bank it. You rake the coals into a tight pile. You cover them, gently, with a layer of ash. Ash is a blanket. It traps the heat and starves the fire of just enough air to keep it from flaring, but not enough to smother it. Under that gray blanket, the coals smolder low and slow through the whole night. And in the morning, you brush the ash aside, feed the glow a breath of air and a handful of dry tinder, and the fire returns from the dead. This one trick, banking a fire, is quietly one of the most important technologies your species ever developed. It turned fire from a brief event into something that could last for weeks, for months, in some places for years. But ash and coals only work if you have shelter. What happens when the rain finds you anyway? This is where your ancestors became engineers without ever knowing the word. They learned that fire needs 3 things and hates 3 things. It needs fuel, air, and heat. It hates too much water, too much wind, and too little air. So they built around those rules. They pulled fire deep into caves and rock overhangs where the roof kept off the rain. They dug shallow pits so the coals sat below the ground, protected. They ringed the fire with stones to shield its precious core from the gusts that could scatter and kill it. And they thought ahead. This is what separates a clever animal from a human mind. They did not just protect today's fire, they prepared for tomorrow's rain. They gathered dry wood before the storm and stored it under cover, deep in the cave, so that even when the world outside was soaked, there was always something dry to feed the coals. Have you ever kept something alive that could not survive on its own? A tiny plant, a sick animal, a newborn. You checked on it constantly. You worried in the night. That is exactly the relationship your ancestors had with fire. It was a dependent, a member of the group that could not feed itself, and someone had to care for it. Which brings us to perhaps the most human invention in this entire story. Not a tool at all, a job. In group after group of humans, studied by anthropologists across the world, one role appears again and again: the fire keeper, the person, sometimes an elder, whose whole responsibility was the fire. While others hunted or slept, the fire keeper watched the coals, fed them, banked them, woke in the night to check the glow. Because the whole band understood a simple, terrible truth. If everyone is responsible for the fire, then no one is. And a fire that no one is truly watching is a fire that dies. So they gave it a guardian, And that person carried, quite literally, the survival of everyone else in the low red light of a pile of coals. Now, here is where the story leaves the campfire and goes on a journey. Because humans do not stay in one place, they move, following herds, chasing seasons, fleeing cold. And you cannot drag a burning hearth across 100 miles of wet land. So your ancestors faced a problem that sounds impossible. How do you carry fire? They solved it, all over the world with a device so elegant it feels like magic. The fire carrier. In its simplest form, it is nothing but a bundle, holding an ember at its heart, smoldering just enough to stay alive, but not enough to burn away. Some peoples used a hard, shelf-shaped tree fungus that clings to old trunks. Prepared and dried, its inner flesh catches a spark instantly and then holds a glowing coal for hours. They wrapped these smoldering cores in bark, in moss, in animal hide, letting the ember breathe through a small gap. A living coal tucked inside a bundle, walking across the landscape on a human shoulder. And when they reached the next camp, wet and tired, they did not need lightning. They unwrapped the bundle, coaxed the ember with dry tinder and a steady breath, and the fire they had carried from the last valley bloomed back to life in the new one. Do you understand how profound that is? They were transporting a flame across time and space. A single fire could travel with a group for a season, never fully dying, passed from one banking to the next. There is a haunting real example. On the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal lived peoples who, when first observed by outsiders, did not appear to make fire from scratch at all. And yet they always had it. How? They never let it die. They kept fires burning constantly, and when they traveled, they carried smoldering logs and embers with them, generation after generation. Their fire may have been, in a sense, thousands of years old. An unbroken chain of flame, kept alive without a single break, because breaking it was unthinkable. Sit with that image. A fire older than any person alive. A flame that has never once gone out, carried through storms and across water by people who understood that the fire in front of them was not really theirs. It was a gift from the dead, on loan to the living, to be handed to those not yet born. Of course, humans eventually learned to make fire at will by spinning a stick against a board until friction births a coal by striking sparks from stone. These were staggering breakthroughs. But notice something. Even after humans could make fire, they did not stop keeping it. Because making fire is hard, especially in the rain, especially with cold, wet hands and cold, wet wood. So the wise choice was always the same. If you already have a fire, do not let it go out. It is far easier to keep a fire alive than to bring a new one into the world. Which is why, for all of human history, the real skill was never the spark. It was the guarding. And this is where the ancient story quietly reaches forward and touches you. Because you still do this. You just do it with everything except fire. Think about the things in your life that are easy to start and hard to keep. A friendship is easy to begin and hard to maintain. A habit is easy to try for one day and hard to protect through the gray weeks when nothing seems to work. A relationship, a discipline, a hope, a sense of who you are. None of these die in a single dramatic moment. They die the way a fire dies in the rain. Slowly, quietly. While you are distracted. One unfed night at a time. Have you ever let something precious go cold because you assumed you could always start it up again later? The friend you stopped calling. The practice you stopped keeping. The version of yourself you stopped feeding. That is the oldest mistake in the human story. It is the belief that fire is always easy, always one quick spark away. Your ancestors would have found that belief dangerous. They knew a colder truth, that some fires once truly dead are not so easily reborn, and that the only thing standing between the coals and the dark is someone willing to keep watch. So tonight, when the sun goes down and the room grows dim, you will reach out, almost without thinking, and flip a switch. Light will flood the space, and you will not feel, even for a second, the ancient fear that once ruled every night of every human life. But somewhere deep inside you, older than memory, there is a firekeeper still. A part of you that knows how to guard a small glow through a long, dark night. A part that understands, without being told, that the most important flames in your life are not the ones you start. They are the ones you refuse to let die. Right now, without moving an inch, you are surrounded by fire, and for the first time you know exactly how much it once cost to keep even a single ember alive through the endless rain.